Hi everyone. Um, Welcome to this series on learning React Native. So in this first video, I'd like to set some context and set and give a little bit of introduction um, about what it is that we are going to learn and why do we choose React Native. So first of all, let's understand that what we are doing here is native app development. And when it comes to native app development, there are several ways in which we can develop native apps. The officially supported um, mechanisms when it comes to Android phones is uh, is Android Studio and Flutter from Google. There are a few other mechanisms of doing this as well. Like there used to be a Cardova framework which was very popular for creating hybrid apps. Then Ionic is now creating hybrid applications, and we also have React Native. So, how do we choose which of these platforms are suitable for uh, what reasons? Um, so, basically, one of the choice is the choice of language that we use. Android Studio basically requires you to learn Java and do development in Java. When it comes to Flutter, Cardova, and Ionic, they work in JavaScript. And React Native is JavaScript um, along with what is called as JSX. So it's a slight variation of JavaScript, which we'll get into when we start learning React Native. Uh, another uh, another thing that we need to consider when choosing one of these platforms uh, is what devices or what OSs is going to support. Like I don't mean Android versions, but what I mean is the application which you're going to build, is it going to work on Apple phones, iPhones, as well as on Android. So Android Studio is very specific to Android. Flutter is something which Google is promising that it's going to be used for building um, applications in its new operating system. So Google is coming up with a new operating system, so it's going to be used in that. So I'm not sure whether Flutter compiles to iOS. It's quite new. I still haven't gotten very deep into that. Cardova creates hybrid apps. Ionic also creates hybrid apps, and React Native basically creates a native app for Android, iOS. So the difference between Android and hybrid and iOS is that, so if you see Cardova and Ionic are both hybrid applications, whereas React, I have written it down as Android plus iOS. So the difference is that when you build an application in Cardova or Ionic, it it creates a similar kind of package. So it works in something like web views, and it's like a browser which renders your components, and this environment is mostly going to remain same. Whereas when it comes to React Native, then React Native actually uses the native components which are part of the Android Studio SDK or Android SDK, and it also enables us to take more control of the native application um, by integrating, by mixing um, certain by designing some components with Android Studio in Java, and then reusing those components within React Native. So it's um, so this gives us even more power over the kind of applications which we are building. Whereas applications such as Ionic and Cardova, they do not exploit the uh, the capabilities of the Android SDK and the native components, the native UI components which are already available in the Android Studio. So that I would say is one of the advantages. Um, so um, yeah, so that's the reason why we choose how we choose these different applications. So when it comes to React Native specifically, so why are we choosing React Native specifically? So if we look at the different UI frameworks which are available in the market, um, React, Angular, and Vue.js are probably the most popular ones which are around today. Um, so even when we use a framework such as Ionic, we have a choice of using either React or Android or Vue.js, all these three. Um, and uh, Yeah, I'm not sure whether that's possible in Cardova, but Ionic is a framework that is built on top of Cardova. Now, uh, so Angular versus React versus Vue. I'll not go very deep into this, but I would eliminate Angular straight away from this equation because Angular is quite opinionated. Um, so if you want to build a very simple feature in Angular, then you have to write lots and lots of boilerplate code. You have to write lots of code, which is very similar to how we do Java development in Android Studio. React and Vue, from that point of view, are somewhat unopinionated. They give us freedom to express, um, freedom to follow our own style of coding, and so on. Uh, and what trumps React um, on top of Vue and Angular is the support for React platforms. Um, so React supports a wide variety of platforms. So if you know how to code, how to think in React.js, then you could apply the same concepts to build applications for the web, um, applications for uh, native devices, which is iPhone and iOS devices, um, for building AR applications, augmented reality, and virtual reality applications, virtual reality kind of apps. So, if we were to just take a stock of React platforms, then these are the wide variety of platforms that React supports. So React Native is what we are going to learn, then React VR, AR, SketchUp, Bless, PDF, ReadOkix. So there are so many different uh, platforms in which React can actually uh, be applied. So how this is so just to try and explain to you how this is going to work is the React, the components and the component design and the way you think um, about designing and designing dynamic UI applications. This concept is going to remain same across every platform. So the only difference that is going to come is what type of components do we use to render. So if we take the example of web versus native, then web would have certain tags such as h1 tag, ul tag, lip, div, span, etc. Right? So these are the components which we use in the web environment. When it comes to native environment, we use something like view and text, right? So these components are then going to use the native component within Android or within iOS and then compile a native package for us. So this is one of the most appealing features of React. So this is uh, this is why I think um, going with React is kind of very beneficial in the long run. Um, so um, in order to learn React.js, we'll start with the next video in which we are going to learn about Flexbox. So uh, Flexbox is basically a CSS framework for layouts. Now, when it comes to Flexbox, so uh, why do we have to know Flexbox? The reason is because once we start native application development, much of the time we will be working on layouts about positioning different components at different parts of the screen. And doing that, and when it comes to React Native, then Flexbox is a supported mechanism of doing that. We will not be able to use something like floats within this environment, but Flexbox is something which is very much convenient to use. So that's why if we are not very much updated with the HTML knowledge, the CSS knowledge, then perhaps we don't know Flexbox, and that is the reason why we will be starting with Flexbox. Followed by Flexbox, we will get into JavaScript, the basics of JavaScript to get us started. So so the language basics and the survival skills which are necessary for us to start coding in React.js. So this is something which we are going to cover. And once we have covered the basics of JavaScript, the language basics, then we will get into React native development. So I'm pretty sure that um, that this looks like a very long wait to actually get into React Native development. But the approach that I'm going to take is going to get your hands dirty with React Native development in the very first session itself. That is in the Flexbox session itself. So see you there in that video.